There is a special circle in hell reserved for people who send legal documents on December 31st. It is located right between the people who talk on speakerphone in public bathrooms and the ones who invented low-rise jeans. I stood in the foyer of my Park Avenue penthouse, staring at the offender. A thick, yellow envelope lying on the console table. It didn't have a return address, but it had the distinct, smug aura of a divorce settlement. Specifically, the kind drafted by a law firm in the Cayman Islands that charges by the minute to ruin your life. My husband William had clearly been busy. I looked at the grandfather clock, 6:50 p.m. If this were a movie, I would tear it open, mascara running down my face, and throw a vase at the wall. But I was Evelyn Mercer, CEO of a diamond empire. I didn't throw vases. They were Ming Dynasty and appreciated in value at 6% annually. And I certainly didn't let a man with a comb-over dictate my emotional state on a holiday. "Not tonight, Satan," I whispered to the envelope. I picked it up. Instead of opening it, I walked over to the bookshelf. I pulled out a copy of War and Peace, a book William had sworn to read for the last 20 years but had only ever used as a coaster for his scotch. I slid the envelope inside the cover and shoved the book back onto the shelf. Perfect. The safest place on earth. A book my husband was terrified of. 3 minutes later, the front door code beeped. William stumbled in. At 58, he was trying desperately to fight gravity, and gravity was winning. He was wearing a tuxedo that was perhaps a little too slim fit, making him look like a sausage casing that was holding on for dear life. "Evelyn," he announced, a bit too loudly. "Darling, sorry I'm late. The traffic, absolute madness. A cab driver almost hit a poodle." He was sweating. In December, he walked into the living room, his eyes scanning the room like a burglar checking for security cameras. His gaze landed on the console table. It was empty. I saw the malfunction in his brain. Where is it? Did she get it? Did the courier get lost? Is she going to kill me? I stood by the fireplace, sipping my champagne, looking the picture of tranquility. "Hello, William," I said, giving him a small, mysterious smile. "You look moist." He jumped. "Moist? Just brisk walk." From the car, he laughed nervously. It sounded like a hyena choking on a bone. "So, any mail today? Deliveries?" "Just the florist," I lied smoothly. "Why, were you expecting something? A love letter, perhaps?" He turned pale. "No, God, no. Who writes letters anymore? Ha! Paper is so obsolete." He walked to the bar, his hands shaking so much the ice tongues clattered against the crystal bucket like a drum solo. He poured himself a drink that was 90% whiskey and 10% regret. "Well," he said, turning back to me, trying to lean casually against the bar, but slipping slightly on the polished floor. "Here's to us, Evie. To another year." I raised my glass, watching him squirm. He thought he was the Wolf of Wall Street, but right now he looked more like a nervous hamster in a designer suit. "To us, William," I toasted, my voice dripping with sweet venom. "And to all the surprises the new year will bring. I have a feeling this one is going to be a real page-turner." I glanced at the bookshelf where War and Peace sat. William followed my gaze, clueless. He drank. I smiled. The game hadn't just started. I was already dealing the cards, and he didn't even know he was at the table. If there is one thing I have learned in 30 years of business, it is that guilty men are incredibly generous. They are also, unfortunately, terrible actors. William was pacing around the living room like a golden retriever that had just eaten the Thanksgiving turkey and was waiting for someone to notice the carcass on the floor. He kept checking his phone, then putting it face down on the coffee table, then picking it up again to check the weather. "Is it snowing harder?" he asked for the third time in 5 minutes. "It is winter, William," I said, adjusting the throw pillow on the sofa. "The snow tends to do that." He laughed, a loud, booming laugh that was entirely too big for the quiet room. "Right, you and your wit. God, I've missed this." Missed this? He had seen me at breakfast this morning. We discussed the plumbing bill. It wasn't exactly a stand-up comedy routine. He cleared his throat and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a slim velvet box. The universal symbol of a man trying to buy his way out of a moral deficit. "I know we said no big gifts this year," he started, his voice dropping an octave to what he probably thought was a seductive baritone. "But when I saw this, I saw you." I took the box. I didn't need to feign surprise. I was genuinely curious to see what price tag he had put on his conscience. I opened it. Inside lay a diamond tennis bracelet. It was stunning, objectively speaking. But I recognized it immediately. It was the same bracelet from the Vanderhoven bankruptcy auction last month. I knew because I had bid on it for the company inventory and lost. William had outbid me through a proxy, so he was gifting me jewelry he bought with money he likely borrowed, which I had tried to buy with my own money. The circular logic was almost impressive. "Oh, William," I said, letting a gasp escape. "It's heavy. Let me put it on you." He moved behind me. This was where the comedy truly began. William's hands, usually steady enough to sign million-dollar checks, were fumbling with the clasp like a teenager trying to unhook a bra in a movie theater. He was sweating. I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Damn clasp," he muttered. "They make these things so small now." "Take your time," I said, sipping my drink. "We have all night? Unless you have somewhere to be?" He froze. The clasp finally clicked. No, of course not. Just us." He leaned down to kiss my neck. That was when I smelled it. It wasn't perfume, it wasn't lipstick, it was peppermint and eucalyptus. He smelled like a high-end yoga mat. I pulled away slightly, turning to face him. "You've changed your cologne. It's very invigorating. Smells like a spa." William flinched. His eyes widened. "Oh, that?" "Yes. I stopped by the gym for a quick steam before coming home. Trying to get healthy for the new year, you know? New year, new body." He sucked in his stomach. He actually sucked in his gut right in front of me, puffing out his chest. He looked like a pigeon trying to impress a statue. "Well," I said, resisting the urge to poke his tense stomach. "It's working. You look different." He beamed, clearly thinking the lie had landed. "Thanks, Evie. Actually, my trainer says I have the core strength of a man half my age. Pretty lit, right?" I choked on my sparkling water. I coughed, dabbing my mouth with a napkin. "I'm sorry, did you just say lit?" "Yeah," he shrugged, adjusting his cufflinks, trying to look casual but looking more like a dad trying to bond with his estranged son at a skate park. "You know, cool, exciting. The market is lit. This bracelet is lit." I stared at him. My husband, the man who still used the word hogwash unironically, had just used Gen Z slang. There was only one way a 58-year-old man learned the word lit. He learned it from someone who was currently young enough to be on her parents' health insurance. "It certainly is," I said, standing up and smoothing my dress. "Well, since you're so lit and full of core strength, you can mix me another drink. I'm gonna need it." I turned away to hide the smirk that was threatening to break my poker face. He thought he was playing me. He thought he was charming. But all he had done was confirm everything. He didn't just have a mistress. He had a young mistress. One who did yoga, liked peppermint oil, and taught him slang that made him sound like a malfunctioning robot. The game was on, and I was about to teach him that lit was also the past tense of what I was going to do to his entire world. New Year's Day is traditionally a time for quiet reflection, Bloody Marys, and perhaps a gentle walk. In the Mercer household, however, it apparently now involved a private Pilates session with a woman who had more energy than a golden retriever on espresso. Her name was Jade. She was 25, had a ponytail that defied the laws of physics, and she was currently standing in my sunroom. "Happy New Year, Mrs. Mercer," she chirped, unrolling her mats. "We are going to manifest so much wellness today. The energy is huge." "I'd prefer to manifest some aspirin and silence, Jade," I said, tightening the belt of my silk robe. "But by all means, proceed." I was about to retreat to the sanctuary of my office when the library door banged open. William emerged. If I hadn't been plotting his financial ruin, I might have laughed until I needed oxygen. My husband, a man whose previous idea of cardio was swirling his cognac snifter vigorously, was wearing neon blue compression leggings. They were tight, aggressively tight. I could tell what religion he was from across the room. "Morning, team," William announced, jogging in place. His knees made a sound like popping bubble wrap. "Thought I'd join the session. Start the year strong. Core strength, right, Jade?" I stared at him over the rim of my coffee cup. "William, are you wearing scuba gear?" "It's performance wear, Evelyn," he said, looking offended. "It aids circulation. It's very tech." "It's very disturbing," I muttered. "All right, let's hit the mats." Jade yelled, clapping her hands. "Let's start with a plank to activate the fire within." I sat on the chaise lounge to watch the show. What followed was the most excruciating display of physical comedy I had ever witnessed. William got down on his elbows. Within 10 seconds, he began to vibrate. Not a subtle tremble, but a violent, full-body shake. He looked like a washing machine on the spin cycle trying to hold itself together with duct tape. "Breathe into the discomfort, Will," Jade encouraged, her voice slipping into a tone that was a little too familiar. She walked over and placed her hands on his lower back to adjust him. "Engage the glutes. Squeeze." "I am squeezing," William wheezed, his face turning the color of a ripe plum. "Is it hot in here?" "You're doing great, Mr. Mercer." "Total beast mode," Jade cheered. Beast mode. I took a slow sip of coffee. Then came the moment that stopped the comedy and brought the cold reality rushing back. Jade moved to adjust William's arm for a side plank. As she reached out, the sleeve of her oversized hoodie slid up. Glinting in the winter sunlight was a gold bracelet with 5 clover-shaped motifs made of black onyx. I froze. 3 weeks ago, William had shown me a catalog with that exact bracelet. He told me he needed to buy a culturally significant gift for the wife of a Japanese investor to close a deal. He had charged it to our joint business development account. "That is a lovely bracelet, Jade," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. Jade stiffened. William collapsed from his plank with a heavy, wet thud, groaning into the yoga mat. "Oh, this," Jade stammered, pulling her sleeve down quickly. "Thanks. It's vintage. From my grandma. She has super cool taste." "Your grandmother must be very stylish," I said dryly, "and remarkably wealthy for a woman living on a pension." William scrambled to his feet, dripping with sweat and desperation. "Okay, wow, great workout. I think that's enough for today. Don't want to overdo it, right? Injuries and all that." He was practically herding Jade toward the door. "Jade, you should head out, beat the traffic. Evelyn and I have church." "We have church." "We haven't been to church since 1998, William," I noted. Once the door clicked shut behind Jade, and her scent of eucalyptus and lies, William turned to me. He grabbed a towel, wiping his face, trying to regain the dignity that the neon leggings had completely stripped away. "So," he panted, breathless, "since we're all energized." I was looking at the books, just a small cash flow thing at the fund. He walked over to the desk and picked up a folder. "I have these loan papers. Just a short-term guarantee. 5 million, just need your signature to bridge the gap until the Asian markets open." He smiled. It was a winning smile. If you didn't know he was sleeping with the Pilates instructor he just paid for with my money. "You know I'm good for it, Evie," he said. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at his ridiculous blue legs. "Leave it there, darling," I said, standing up. "I'll sign it after I finish my coffee." "You're an angel," he exhaled, relief washing over him. "No, William," I thought as I walked away. "I'm the executioner, and you just put your head on the block." There is a common misconception that unfaithful husbands are like James Bond, stealthy, sophisticated, and masters of encryption. In reality, my husband William was more like Mr. Bean with a platinum credit card. After the Pilates incident, William retreated to the shower to wash off the sweat of his lies. I could hear him singing. He was belting out "Feeling Good" by Nina Simone. The irony was so thick I could have spread it on toast. He had left his laptop on the kitchen island, open. It wasn't even in sleep mode. It was just sitting there, glowing invitingly next to the bowl of organic lemons. I walked over. I didn't feel like a hacker. I felt like a parent checking a teenager's browser history. He had a password, of course. William prided himself on cybersecurity. Last month, he gave me a lecture on two-factor authentication that lasted 40 minutes. The hint popped up, high school nickname. I stared at the screen. William had gone to a prep school where everyone wore boat shoes and had names like Trip or Scooter. But William had always tried to rebrand himself as an athlete. I typed in, "The Hammer." Incorrect password. I rolled my eyes. I tried, quarterback 1. Incorrect password. I sighed, thinking about his recent midlife crisis, the neon leggings, and the slang. I typed in, "Big Will. Access granted." I almost laughed out loud. Big Will. The man really was a caricature drawn by a cartoonist who hated men. I clicked on his email. He had organized his inbox with folders. One was labeled Family, which was empty. Another was labeled Work, which was full of spam. And then there was a folder labeled simply Project Freedom. Subtlety was not his strong suit. I opened Project Freedom. The first email was from Vanguard and Partners, the divorce lawyers. Subject: Asset Division Strategy. Body: Don't worry, Mr. Mercer. If we file on Jan 2nd, we can argue that the diamond inventory is a marital asset because you consulted on the marketing. We will crush her. Crush me? I whispered, taking a sip of my tea. William, you can't even crush a garlic clove without a manual. But the real comedy gold was in the financials. I found a spreadsheet titled Monthly Burn. He was tracking his spending on the mistress, Jade, but he had categorized everything under business codes to hide it from me. Rent. Listed as off-site storage facility, $4,500. My thought, unless he's storing a collection of oversized hoodies and bad decisions, that is a very expensive storage unit. Van Cleef bracelet, listed as office supplies heavy duty. My thought, heavy duty? Was he using the bracelet to tow a car? Spa weekend in Aspen, listed as team building retreat. My thought, it was a team of 2, and I'm guessing there wasn't much building going on. And then I found the kicker. The reason he needed my signature for the $5 million loan. He wasn't investing in the Asian markets. He had sunk the money into a cryptocurrency called ChadCoin. I stared at the screen. ChadCoin. According to the prospectus in his download folder, it was a revolutionary blockchain ecosystem for alpha males. The logo was a gorilla wearing sunglasses. My husband, a man who once asked me if the cloud was affected by rain, had bet our liquidity on a digital monkey coin that had lost 60% of its value in the last week. I heard the shower turn off. I quickly closed the windows, leaving only a recipe for chicken pot pie open on the screen. William walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel, smelling of steam and false confidence. Hey, he grinned, seeing me at his computer. Checking out dinner options? I'm starving. Being in beast mode really works up an appetite. It certainly does, Big Will, I said, using his password as a nickname. He froze. What did you call me? Big Will, I smiled innocently. It suits you. You seem so large and in charge today. He puffed up, the towel slipping slightly. Well, you know, I try. I was just looking at this recipe, I said, sliding the laptop back to him. But then I realized I'm not in the mood for chicken. I think I'm in the mood for raw meat. William blinked. Sushi? Something like that, I said, walking past him. By the way, I left the signed loan guarantee on the desk. You did? His face lit up like a Christmas tree. Evie, you're a lifesaver. I'll get this to the bank first thing. Oh, I wouldn't rush, I called back over my shoulder. But do check the fine print, darling. I made a few stylistic edits. He didn't check. He was too busy mentally spending the money on more Chad coins. He didn't know that the document I signed wasn't a guarantee. It was a transfer of liability. I hadn't just refused to pay his debt. I had legally signed his debt over to his own personal trust fund, the one his mother left him. He was about to bankrupt himself, and he was going to thank me for handing him the pen. I left the penthouse around noon. I told William I was going to the spa for a realignment. Good idea, babe, he shouted from the living room, where he was currently sitting cross-legged on a silk cushion, wearing noise-canceling headphones. He was listening to a guided meditation app that I could hear leaking out. A soothing voice was saying, "You are a lion. You are the king of the jungle. Roar at your obstacles." William let out a soft, tentative roar. It sounded less like a lion and more like a cat asking for tuna. I suppressed a laugh, grabbed my coat, and walked out. I wasn't going to a spa. I was going to see the only man in New York who hated my husband almost as much as I did. Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was 70 years old, wore 3-piece tweed suits regardless of the weather, and his office smelled like old law books and pipe tobacco. He had been my father's lawyer, and he treated the modern world with deep, personal suspicion. I found him at his desk, staring at the stack of documents I had brought over, including the Project Freedom folder and the loan guarantee I had tricked William into signing. Arthur adjusted his spectacles. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. Then he looked back at the paper. Evelyn, he rasped, his voice like gravel crunching under tires. Did William actually buy something called ChadCoin? He did, I replied, sipping the lukewarm tea his secretary had brought. Apparently, it's the future of alpha finance. Arthur took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He invested $5 million in a digital currency represented by a gorilla wearing sunglasses, and he did this using the company's liquidity? He calls it diversifying the portfolio, Arthur. Arthur let out a sound that was half laugh, half cough. The man is a ham sandwich trying to run a nuclear power plant. He picked up the loan document. This was the trap. The document William thought was a guarantee from me, but was actually a liability transfer. And he signed this? Arthur asked, a mischievous glint appearing in his eyes. Without reading Section 4, Clause B? He was in a rush, I explained. He had to get back to his beast mode workout. He saw my signature and assumed I was bailing him out. Arthur chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound. Section 4, Clause B states that the signatory, that's him, personally assumes all debt obligations using his individual inheritance trust as collateral, effectively releasing Mercer & Co. from any liability. Arthur leaned back, slapping the table. My God, Evelyn. You didn't just hang him to dry. You convinced him to buy the rope, tie the knot, and stand on the chair. It was a team effort, I said modestly. His incompetence did most of the heavy lifting. So, Arthur said, shifting into business mode. We have the leverage, we have the proof of infidelity, the tracking on the bracelet, the Pilates receipts, we have the proof of financial malfeasance. We can bury him. When do you want to pull the trigger? I looked out the window at the gray New York skyline. I thought about the divorce papers hiding in my copy of War and Peace. I thought about the roar in the living room. Not yet, I said. The annual spring gala is in 3 weeks. He's planning to announce his new venture there. He thinks he's going to be the star of the night. Arthur smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. A public execution, Arthur mused. Very Roman. I like it. He wants a show, Arthur, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. I'm just going to give him the grand finale. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from William. Big Will. Hey babe, just checked the bank app. The funds haven't hit yet. The crypto market is dipping. Need to buy the dip. To the moon, I typed back. Banks are slow on holidays, darling. Patience is a virtue. Just keep roaring. I put the phone away. To the moon indeed. Or, more accurately, crashing straight into the earth. They say you should keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I decided to seat my enemy across from me at the dinner table and feed him risotto. I had insisted on hosting a celebratory dinner for William's new financial ventures. And because I am a benevolent wife, I insisted we invite Jade. She's part of your wellness team, darling, I had told William. We can't have you conquering the crypto market with a tight lower back, can we? William had looked like he wanted to jump out the window, but he agreed. He had no choice. So there we were. Wednesday night. Jade was wearing a crop top that said "Spiritual Gangster" at a dinner table set with grandmother's silver. William was wearing a velvet smoking jacket that made him look like a magician who had lost his rabbit. He was sweating so much I was worried he would slip off his chair. This risotto is bussin', Jade said, breaking the silence. She looked at me. Is that the word? It slaps? I believe the word is delicious, Jade. I smiled, pouring more wine into William's glass. But I'm glad it slaps. William took a gulp of wine. So, Evie, great dinner. Really. We should probably wrap up early, though. Big day tomorrow. Markets never sleep. Oh, nonsense, I said, clapping my hands. We haven't even got to the main surprise yet. I reached under the table and pulled out a large wrapped gift box. William froze, his fork hovered halfway to his mouth. What is that? I did some research on your new investment, William, I said sweetly. That Chad coin you're so passionate about. I wanted to show my support. I placed the box in front of him. Open it. He looked at the box like it contained a bomb. His hands shook as he tore the paper. He pulled out the object. It was a giant plush stuffed gorilla. It was wearing sunglasses and holding a banana. Silence. Jade's eyes went wide. That is literally Harambe. It's the mascot? I beamed. For your coin, I read the white paper, darling. Apes together strong, isn't that the motto? I thought you could keep him in your office. Maybe put him in the chair when you're not there. I doubt anyone would notice the difference. William stared at the stuffed gorilla. He looked at me. He looked at the gorilla. The resemblance in intelligence was striking. It's funny, William croaked. Thanks, Evie. Very thoughtful. I named him Alimony, I said casually, taking a bite of my risotto. Clatter. William dropped his fork onto his plate. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "What?" he squeaked. His voice was an octave higher than usual. "Alimony," I repeated, innocent as a lamb. "It's a funny name, isn't it? I read a story today about a man who tried to hide his assets in a stuffed animal to avoid paying alimony. Can you imagine? People are so creative these days." William was now pale. He grabbed his water glass, but his hand was shaking so badly he spilled a little on his velvet jacket. "Oh no," Jade cried, grabbing a napkin and dabbing his chest. "Mr. Mercer, you're spilling. You're such a mess today. Is your Mercury in retrograde?" "I'm fine," William snapped, pushing her hand away. He looked at me, terror in his eyes. "Evelyn, are you imply?" "I'm implying nothing, darling," I interrupted, petting the gorilla's head. "I'm just making conversation. By the way, speaking of tropical places, have you ever been to the Cayman Islands?" William started to choke. Actual choking. He began coughing violently, his face turning purple. "Oh my God," Jade screamed. "He's choking on the busing risotto. Raise his arms," I instructed calmly, not moving from my seat. "It opens the airway." William sat there, coughing, arms raised in the air like he was being robbed, while Jade slapped his back and the stuffed gorilla stared at him with plastic, judgmental eyes. I took a sip of my wine, Pinot Noir. It had never tasted so sweet. "You really should chew your food, William," I said soothingly. "You never know when it might be your last good meal." He looked at me, tears streaming down his face from the coughing fit. In that moment, he knew. Somewhere, deep in his lizard brain, he knew I knew. But he was too terrified to ask. "Dessert?" I offered. "I made sticky toffee pudding. It's incredibly rich." The Mercer & Co. Spring Gala is the kind of event where people spend 3 hours getting ready to stand in a room and judge other people who spent 4 hours getting ready. The ballroom was packed. Chandeliers sparkled, champagne flowed, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies and old money. And then there was William. My husband had decided that tonight was his night. He was wearing a tuxedo with a shimmering matte midnight blue lapel that caught the light in a way that suggested he might be part of a Las Vegas magic act. He was vibrating with confidence. He had spent the last hour in the VIP green room, practicing his Steve Jobs walk. "This is it, Evie," he told me backstage, checking his teeth in a spoon. "I'm going to announce the Mercer Crypto Jewelry Initiative. We're going to put diamonds on the blockchain. It's a paradigm shift. It's synergetic." "It sounds very complex," I said, adjusting his bow tie. "Just remember to breathe, darling. We wouldn't want you to pass out from all that synergy." "I'm a lion," he whispered to himself. Roar. I walked out to my table, where Jade was seated. She had somehow managed to get an invite, William, obviously. She was wearing a dress that was essentially a neon pink bandage held together by hope and double-sided tape. "Hey, Mrs. M," she waved, holding a tiny crab cake. "These mini Krabby Patties are fire." "Enjoy them, Jade," I smiled. "They might be the last free meal you get for a while." "What?" "Hush now," I pointed to the stage. "The show is starting." The lights dimmed, a spotlight hit the podium. The Rocky theme song began to play, William's choice, naturally. William trotted onto the stage. He raised his hands like he had just won a boxing match, despite the fact that his only opponent was a flight of stairs. "Good evening, Titans of Industry," William bellowed into the microphone. Feedback screeched. He winced. "Sorry, technical glitch, just like the markets, right? Unpredictable." Nobody laughed. A cough echoed from the back of the room. "I am here to announce a revolution," William continued, pacing the stage. "Imagine a world where your jewelry isn't just a rock. It's a token. A Chad token, backed by the Mercer legacy." He pointed to the giant screen behind him. "Roll the presentation." This was the moment. I had swapped the USB drive in his pocket while adjusting his tie backstage. William clicked the remote. He expected a sleek graph showing Chad coin going to the moon. Instead, the massive 40-foot screen displayed a photo. It was a close-up of the stuffed gorilla I had given him at dinner. The one named Alimony. The crowd murmured. William turned around, saw the gorilla, and laughed nervously. "Ha! A little humor to start. We call him, the chief financial officer." He clicked the remote again. The next slide appeared. It was a scanned receipt, a receipt from Van Cleef & Arpels. Item, 5-motif bracelet. Buyer, William Mercer. Payment method, Mercer & Co., corporate expense account. Note on receipt. For Jade, happy 3-month anniversary. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pearl drop. William stared at the screen. He clicked the button frantically. Click, click, click. The next slide appeared. It was a screenshot of his text to me. The crypto market is dipping. To the moon. And then the final slide. A photo of William in the neon blue leggings doing a downward dog with his face purple from exertion. Caption: Beast mode. Laughter began to ripple through the room. Not polite laughter, real, belly-aching laughter. Wait, William yelled, hitting the remote against his leg. This is a hack. Russian hackers. They're trying to sabotage the algorithm. Sit down, William, Jade hissed from the table, trying to hide behind a centerpiece. You're acting so uncool. I stood up. The spotlight naturally found me. I walked to the stage steps, looking up at my husband, who was now sweating so much his shimmering lapels were fogging up. I took the microphone from a stunned MC. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice calm, authoritative, and amused. I must apologize. My husband seems to have uploaded his personal diary instead of the business plan. The crowd roared with laughter. However, I continued, the Mercer crypto initiative is indeed a fantasy, much like William's belief that he is a lion. The truth is, as of this morning, Mercer & Co. has exercised a clause in our partnership. I turned to William, who looked like he was about to vomit on his shoes. William, darling, I said, sweet as poison, you remember that loan guarantee you signed? The one you didn't read? He nodded, terrified. You didn't sign for a loan. You signed a voluntary transfer of assets. I turned back to the audience. I am pleased to announce that I am now the sole owner of William's personal trust, his real estate portfolio, and yes, even his stash of Chad coins. William dropped the remote. It clattered on the stage. And as for the Project Freedom folder on your laptop, I added, lowering my voice just enough for the mic to catch it intimately. I believe you'll find your freedom outside. The security team has your coat and your leggings. I gestured to the side of the stage. 2 burly security guards stepped forward. William looked at me. He looked at the screen where his blue-legged butt was still projected in 4K resolution. He looked at Jade, who was currently sneaking out the fire exit with a handful of crab cakes. He didn't roar, he squeaked. Evie? Goodbye, Big Will, I said. As they escorted him off stage, I turned to the stunned crowd, raised my champagne glass, and smiled. Now, who is ready for the actual auction? The first item is a vintage diamond bracelet, slightly used. Provenance, a grandmother in Queens. The applause was deafening. The morning after the gala was bright, crisp, and for William Mercer, incredibly expensive. I was sitting in the conference room of Pendleton and Associates sipping an Earl Grey tea. Arthur sat next to me, looking like a vulture that had just spotted a particularly juicy carcass. He's in the lobby, Arthur's secretary buzzed in. He's yelling something about constitutional rights, and he's demanding a charger for his phone. Send him in, I said. The door burst open. William entered. He was still wearing the tuxedo from the night before. The midnight blue lapels were now wrinkled, his bow tie was hanging loose like a dead eel, and he had a stain on his shirt that looked suspiciously like diner mustard. He didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked like a penguin that had been kicked out of the zoo. This is illegal, William screamed, slamming his hands on the mahogany table. You locked me out of the penthouse. You froze my cards. I tried to buy a bagel this morning, Evelyn. A bagel. And the card was declined. Do you know how humiliating it is to have a bagel snatched back from your hands? I imagine it's similar to having your dignity snatched away on a giant projector screen, I replied calmly. Please sit down. You're making the carpet anxious. William collapsed into a chair. He looked wild-eyed. I want my lawyer. You fired your lawyer, Arthur pointed out, peering over his spectacles. Or rather, your payment to Vanguard and Partners bounced this morning. They sent a very polite email dropping you as a client. They also charged you a $500 administrative inconvenience fee. William gaped. But the assets, I have assets, the crypto. Arthur slid a single sheet of paper across the table. About that, Arthur said, fighting a smile. We checked the markets. Your beloved Chad coin suffered a catastrophic event at 3 a.m. Apparently the creator, a 19-year-old in a basement in Belarus, rug pulled the project. He took the liquidity pool and bought a private island. Rug pulled? William whispered. The monkey is dead, William, I said gently. Your $5 million is now worth approximately, let's see, I checked my phone, $12.40, enough for that bagel if you hurry. William put his head in his hands. The silence was broken only by the sound of Arthur aggressively unwrapping a peppermint candy. And Jade? William lifted his head, a glimmer of hope remaining. Does she know? She loves me. We have a connection, a spiritual bond. Ah, the spiritual bond, I nodded. I believe that bond was severed via Instagram story about an hour ago. I turned my iPad around to show him. It was a video of Jade. She was sitting in the first-class lounge at JFK Airport. Caption, toxic energy cleansing. Moving to Bali to find myself. Single life, no more old men, manifesting. She took the crab cakes, William, I added, and your grandmother's bracelet. I decided not to report it stolen. Consider it a severance package. William stared at the screen. The color drained from his face until he matched the shade of the printer paper. But I signed the loan, he stammered, grasping at straws. I signed it to save the company. I was being noble. Arthur chuckled. It sounded like dry leaves crunching. No, son. You signed a document titled Transfer of Liability. You didn't read it because you were too busy looking at your own reflection in the window. You legally agreed that all debts incurred by your investments would be paid by your personal trust fund. Evelyn here simply facilitated the payment. So, William's voice trembled. I have no trust fund? Correct, Arthur said. And no house, and no wife, and no monkey money. William looked at me. For the first time in months, the arrogance was gone. The beast mode was gone. He was just a 58-year-old man in a dirty tuxedo who had played a high-stakes game against the house and lost. Evelyn, he choked out. Where am I supposed to go? I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I picked up my purse. Well, William, I said, channeling my inner life coach. You're always talking about the grind, aren't you? About hustle culture? I think this is a wonderful opportunity for you to start from the bottom. It's very lit. I walked to the door, Arthur following me. Oh, I paused, turning back one last time. I did leave something for you at the front desk. A starter kit for your new life. Money? William asked, his eyes lighting up. Better, I smiled. I left you the stuffed gorilla, so at least you won't be sleeping alone. As the door clicked shut, I heard a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was the soft, pathetic sob of a man realizing that winter had come, and he had sold his coat to buy a picture of a monkey. 3 months had passed since the gala incident. Spring had officially arrived in New York, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't have to pretend to care about the stock market, cryptocurrencies, or whether my husband's socks matched his pocket square. I was free, and according to my dermatologist, I looked 10 years younger. Apparently, shedding 180 pounds of dead weight, William, is excellent for the complexion. I was walking through the West Village, enjoying the sun, when a sudden thirst hit me. I spotted a trendy juice bar on the corner called the Daily Grind. It was the kind of place that charged $15 for blended grass and self-righteousness. Perfect. I walked in. The air smelled of wheatgrass and ginger. Welcome to the Daily Grind. Prepare to get energized, a voice shouted from behind the counter. I froze. I knew that voice. It was the voice that had once commanded boardrooms, poorly. It was the voice that had screamed beast mode into a microphone. I lowered my sunglasses. There, standing behind a wall of organic bananas, was William. He was wearing a visor, a bright orange visor, and an apron that said "Squeeze the Day" in Comic Sans font. He was currently wrestling with an industrial blender that seemed to be winning the fight. William? I asked, my voice echoing in the small shop. He snapped his head up. His eyes went wide. He looked like a deer in headlights, if the deer was also wearing a hairnet. Evelyn? He stammered, trying to lean casually against the counter, but accidentally hitting the pulse button on a blender, which let out a loud, aggressive vroom. He quickly turned it off. I didn't expect to see you here. I imagine not, I said, walking closer. I didn't know you had pivoted to beverage engineering. William straightened his apron. The delusional spark in his eyes, the one that had bought the Chad coins, flickered back to life. Oh, this, he laughed nervously, waving a hand at the fruit. I'm not just a worker, Evie. I'm doing field research, consulting, understanding the supply chain from the ground up, for my next venture, smoothie tech. It's going to be huge. Of course, I nodded solemnly. Smoothie tech, very disruptive. Exactly. He seemed relieved I bought it. I'm basically the, chief liquid officer here. Hey, Chief! A teenager with a nose ring yelled from the back room. Stop yapping and clean the frother. Table 4 needs a mega detox. William turned beet red. Right, on it, Tyler, just delegating. He turned back to me, sweating. Tyler is a tough investor, very demanding. I can see that, I smiled. Well, since you're the chief liquid officer, I'll have the green goddess. And please, William, don't skimp on the ginger. Coming right up, he said, trying to be suave. He grabbed a handful of kale. He grabbed the ginger. He threw them into the blender. He poured in the almond milk with a flourish that was meant to be impressive, but mostly just looked like he was throwing a potion together. He hit the button. Whoosh! He hadn't put the lid on. It happened in slow motion. A geyser of green sludge exploded upward. It hit the ceiling. It hit the orange visor. It coated William's face in a thick, dripping layer of pulverized spinach and shame. The shop went silent. William stood there, green goo dripping from his nose, looking like a swamp monster in a polo shirt. The lid, I observed helpfully. It's usually a key component of the process. William wiped a glob of kale from his eye. He didn't say anything. He just sighed, a deep, wet, gurgling sigh. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill. I placed it in the tip jar. Keep the change, William, I said. Invest it wisely, maybe buy a towel. I turned and walked out into the sunshine. I didn't even get my smoothie. But as I walked down the street, hearing Tyler yell, "Bro, you got kale on the register again," I realized I was full. I was full of the most delicious meal of all. Justice. It was New Year's Eve again. But this time the air didn't bite, it kissed. I was sitting at a small corner table in Les Deux Magots in Paris, watching the snow dust the Saint-Germain-des-Prés church. The cafe was buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of rich hot chocolate. I wasn't waiting for a husband who was delayed at the office. I wasn't wondering if my jewelry was being auctioned off to a teenager in Bali. I was waiting for my dessert. Madame? A waiter placed a crème brûlée in front of me. Perfection. Is this seat taken? A voice asked. I looked up. Standing there was a man. He was tall, with silver hair that was actually styled, not fighting a losing war against gravity. He wore a scarf that looked like it had been tied by someone with opposable thumbs, a refreshing change from William's chaotic fashion choices. That depends, I said, tapping my spoon against the caramelized sugar. On your stance regarding cryptocurrency and neon leggings. The man laughed. It was a warm, deep sound. Not a squeak, not a roar, just a laugh. I prefer cash, he said, smiling, revealing crinkles around kind eyes. And I believe leggings should be restricted to ballet dancers and superheroes. I am neither. Then please, I gestured to the chair. Sit. I'm Evelyn. Thomas, he said, taking the seat. I couldn't help but notice you're reading War and Peace. He pointed to the book on my table, the same copy I had used to hide the divorce papers exactly 1 year ago. I am, I smiled, running my hand over the cover. It's a reminder that even the longest, most difficult wars eventually end, and the survivors get to drink champagne. Thomas signaled the waiter. 2 glasses of your best champagne, please, to the survivors. As we talked, I learned Thomas was a retired history professor. He quoted poetry, not TikTok trends. He smelled of old books and cedar, not bubblegum body spray. He was interested in me, not my bank account, not my connections, just me. So, Evelyn, Thomas asked, looking at me with genuine curiosity, what brings you to Paris? A runaway romance? A runaway victory, I corrected him. I looked out the window. Somewhere in New York, William was probably trying to fix a blender or explaining to a landlord why his rent check was written in crayon. I thought about the woman I was last year, freezing in the foyer, terrified of an envelope, terrified of being alone at 56. I realized now that the envelope wasn't a death sentence. It was a permission slip. It was permission to stop pretending. Permission to stop carrying a man who refused to walk. Permission to realize that being alone in a penthouse is lonely, but being alone in Paris with a handsome professor and a crème brûlée is… well, it's lit, I chuckled at the thought. What's funny? Thomas asked, tilting his head. Just an old joke, I said. I used to think my life was over. But I realized I was just stuck in a bad sequel. Now I'm writing the original screenplay. The church bells began to ring. Midnight. The fireworks erupted over the Seine, painting the sky in gold and violet. Thomas raised his glass. "Happy New Year, Evelyn." I clinked my glass against his. The sound was crisp, clear, and unbreakable. "Happy New Year, Thomas," I said. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. It tasted like peace. And as for the divorce papers, I finally opened them, yesterday. I used the back of the first page to write down a recipe for coq au vin, because that's all William was in the end. A mistake I had learned from, a page I had turned, and a very funny story to tell at dinner parties. I looked at Thomas, I looked at the snow, and I smiled. The Diamond Queen had not just survived, she had upgraded. Spring finally settled over the Hamptons, turning the gray Atlantic Ocean into a sparkling quilt of blue. I sat on the wooden deck of my beach house, a place William had always hated because the internet signal was too weak for day trading. Now the silence was the most luxurious thing I owned. In my hand I held a raw, uncut diamond. It was a new acquisition for Mercer & Co., destined to be polished into something brilliant. It looked rough, jagged, and cloudy. Most people would walk past it, seeing only a dull rock. But I saw the fire waiting inside. I thought about the woman I was on New Year's Eve, frozen in fear, defining her worth by a man who couldn't tell the difference between a wife and an asset. I had spent so many years trying to be the perfect setting for his life, polishing myself to hide his flaws. But diamonds aren't made in comfort. They are made under crushing pressure. They are born in the dark, deep underground, where the heat is unbearable. The betrayal, the public humiliation, the pain, it hadn't broken me. It had forged me. It had stripped away the soft, unnecessary layers and left behind something harder, clearer, and infinitely more valuable. "Penny for your thoughts." Thomas walked out onto the deck, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He didn't ask about the business. He didn't check his phone. He just sat down next to me, comfortable in the quiet. "I was just thinking," I said, placing the rough stone on the table, "that the most beautiful things are often the ones that have survived the most." Thomas smiled, wrapping his hand over mine. His grip was warm, steady, and real. "Then you must be the most beautiful thing I know." I looked out at the ocean. The waves crashed and receded, a rhythm as old as time. The drama was over, the noise was gone. I took a deep breath of the salt air. I didn't need to be a queen or a CEO or a wife to matter. I just needed to be Evelyn. And for the first time in 56 years, that was enough.